Yeah, when I lead circling, it's always a kind of go-to to try and tune in to the people I'm with in the circle, like over and above anything else. I wouldn't say anything takes priority over actually attuning to the space. And when I lead these meaning making calls, I'm kind of curious, still feeling that that's important, but then also not wanting to kind of collapse into how's everyone doing and what's here in the space, rather than actually delivering some hopefully interesting content, which is my plan.
Thank you.
But I do want you guys to be involved and asking questions in service of like deeper clarity and deeper exploration. I want to start with some of what I think are the assumptions that we make, at least in Circling Europe, when we circle. And a big one is, well, I'll name a few. One is that everyone is, whether they know it or not, is actually longing for more connection. And that connection's almost like a magnetic force that's at work that we can start to align with. And that in a way, everyone's wanting more connection, and it's the most scary thing. Like real intimacy is the thing that scares us the most. So there's this kind of push-pull relationship that we have with connection. And it seems like our most primary ways of relating are linked to our needs for attachment and also our needs for individuation. And that all the struggles that we've had with our need for individuation and our need for attachment that we've had throughout our life will show up in real time in our connections now. So in a way, it's all about connection. And the kind of paradox within that is that also there's a way of relating to connection that it's always available. And that connection at its deepest level is about a way of relating to yourself, or a way of relating to life in its entirety. And this idea of life and life force is really primary to what we're doing as well. And another assumption that we work with is that life is already working into greater wholeness, greater love, greater connection, greater healing. Like life force is already trying to resolve these things within us and between us. And that what we can do in circling is maybe see what's getting in the way of that, or explore any ways where life force is being distorted, or where it's been kinked, or where things have got in the way of its natural expression. And one way of thinking of surrender is that it's just getting out of the way and allowing life force to express through us, so that we're vessels for this creative and loving life force energy that can express through us. And I think that assumption does a lot in the way that we're actually in the way that we show up with ourselves and other people. Because then in a way it's like we're not swimming against the current, we're already swimming downstream, which is where we want to go. So there isn't like this desperate thing to fix, or it's like, oh wow, it's already happening, like looking and seeing for where it's already happening, and then what might be in the way of this flow, or what might be obstructing it in subtle ways, and then can we just explore that like with curiosity. And that reminds me of the way of seeing of birthday circling someone. And the beautiful thing that comes with that is that it's how our perception of reality, of our perception of seeing, actually manifests something as well. I actually think love, a nice way of seeing love amongst other ways, is that love is a perception. And that when we fall in love, we're actually seeing clearly. We're actually seeing through divine eyes, you could say, or seeing someone's innocence and beauty, and that it's an accurate perception. And then where love becomes a commitment is our commitment to try to see with that perception. And again, in seeing with that perception, you actually enact a certain reality. So it's not like the observer is separate from the world. The very observing and the way that something is observed is manifesting or is affecting reality in a particular way. And then I think I've spoken a little bit about this, but when you have this ontology of life force being primary in all of us, and that there's just ways that we have distortions and identifications that limit that expression of life force, we can start to see like the ways that we run our energy. And that a really common pattern of a way to run our energy is that we act in with our energy. And that's like self-shaming, self-judgment, self-hatred, anger at ourselves. And as you become more aware of that pattern, you can recognize it more in yourself and others. Just like, oh, like life energy could run anyway now. It could run out through your heart. It could run up your spine into more orgasm. It could center you into more power. It could ground you. But instead, that energy is like acting against yourself. And it learned to do that to survive. It learned to do that because the environment at some point wasn't safe for you to express in that way. So the common example here is that a child that gets angry, and it's not safe to become angry with the parent. And when the child is dependent on the parent for survival, it's safer to make itself wrong than to actually believe the environment is wrong. If the environment's wrong and it's dependent on that for its survival, then it's going to be in a constant state of stress. So the research points to this idea that the child will always make themselves wrong to fit in with the family system and of what's required with them while they're dependent on that survival. So in that way, it seems that we've all inherited these survival mechanisms that where we just start shaming ourselves for making ourselves wrong. And now the environment actually isn't demanding of it, or even if the environment is demanding of it, now we have enough sovereignty and we're not, we don't have survival needs in the environment in the same way, that we can learn to unravel that kind of distortion of our life force. And then the equal and opposite other way that we can run our energy is acting out. So rather than that energy filling us, fulfilling us, and leading to our creative expression, we start to act out, and there's a drama and there's a belief system around that. And again, you can start to see this as just like, this is a way that someone's running their life force energy. And this was the best attempt that they had to manage, but it's not necessarily real anymore. And there's a way that we can hold that and not make it wrong. It's holding that paradox of this is still okay. Like life is trying to work its way out somehow. And we can just name it and be like, see if we can get a shared reality over it, which is this other real underpinning to circling of like, we don't have to do anything, but can we get a shared reality over what's here and be in that together? And then again, that opens the door for this surrender opportunity, because it's just in a shared presence of being with what is that often something transforms or something emerges from that. A lot of what I'm talking about is written really eloquently in the Healing Developmental Trauma book, which is the NAM method. And it has a therapeutic frame all the way through, which brings a particular kind of clinical flavor to it that's we let go of in circling. But it has these distinctions written out incredibly clearly, especially the most common ways that we create these survival identifications. And what I love about that, because it draws so much light on these different styles of our need for connection, and when that's not met, and how we shift and distort reality to manage that. And then when our needs aren't met as a child, how our identity shifts, and when we're not trusted in our autonomy. And there's a lot, I really recommend reading that book, because it goes into detail of like these archetypal ways that we learn to distort our life force to survive. And then you form an identity around that. And as these things get explored, you get the chance to disidentify with these personality traits and ways of being. And then there's something beautiful for me about this. It's once you disidentify, then you're entering into the mystery or what's left. And I've always felt a strong link between what I would consider to be like healing of some way, or disidentifying from an identity, and then like the release of energy and consciousness, which gives me more of a waking up kind of experience in life. And I know David Dada's done some good videos where he distinguishes like therapeutic work, yogic work, and spiritual work, and he says they should never be mixed. And I think they're quite profound distinctions that he makes. But my experience with circling has always been that they can interflow, and there's something useful about having those distinctions. But once you have a therapeutic release, then there's more chance of having a deeper flow and more spiritual experience as well. Linked, like going deeper into these survival mechanisms, it seems very common that we have an identity based around shame. So we have a shame-based identity, and this is something that we can start to recognize in ourselves and in others, where we really believe that we have a belief system around the self-shaming process that's going on. And the idea is that it's not real. Like it's real in that it's happening to you, but it's coming from the place of our innocence. We don't need to be shaming ourselves. And there is a healthy expression of shame that we need to look out for, but in general, there's this self-shaming survival mechanism that has a whole belief system around it that we can learn to let go of and lead ourselves out of. And then normally over the top of the shame-based identity is a pride-based identity. So a lot of my pride-based identity was like being kind of emotionally tough in some way, or like, well, I don't get jealous, but I don't get jealous because I'm not in touch with my feelings, because if I was, I'd be a lot more vulnerable. So these pride-based identities that we can develop that are often compensating for where we feel shame are also not real. They're only as real as we make them. And the more we can capture ourselves in these pride-based identities, the more we can release them into a more surrendered relationship with our life force and life force in general. And what I love, one of the things I love when I'm circling is starting to feel like my life force and other people's life force as one interrelated force of some kind. And that without doing anything, life force is actually trying to support and sustain itself. When you get into that perception of reality, it's like you don't have to care for someone. It's like life force is already looking after itself. And I think that's what's happening when we're in our most beautiful circles. And something I really like that comes with this perspective of these survival mechanisms is that the worst has already happened in our life. Like the shit that we've had to deal with, our environments are so much better now. And the fact that we're adults and can actually look after ourselves, it's like, it's night and day. So our environments are so much better, yet we have these survival mechanisms that kind of hook us back into those past realities. And the actual abundance that's available for us now is quite breathtaking compared to how we typically relate to reality. And a lot of our practice can be about letting love in and realizing how good things are when we're able to disidentify with these old ways of seeing and being. And link with that the idea of we can only actually reject ourselves, not to bypass how painful relationships can be and breakups, but for me it feels like I've been offered all these new adult-like perspectives that are seriously liberating.